One thing about me is that I will always buy the cheapest airplane ticket possible. Stick me in the last row with seats that don't recline. I don't care. I refuse to be nickel and dime. But what if I told you that you could fly on a semi-private airline for basically the same price that I've paid in the past to sit in the middle seat in economy and get kicked by the kid right behind me for the whole flight? That would sound a little bit too good to be true, right? Well, that's what I'm hoping to find out. So I first became aware of this airline when I was watching a show called Crime Spree, which was kind of a precursor to Jet Lag the game. And the premise is that they're chasing each other around the country, and I saw this guy Sam book a flight and show up at this airplane hangar. I knew their budget wasn't massive, so I'm like, what is this airline? And the reason I was so curious is because you and I both know how terrible the whole flying and airport experience can be. For starters, economy seats simply aren't built for people over 6 feet tall. They're also not built for anyone to get an armrest. It's just a lose-lose. And then the airport can just kind of be a miserable place. Seating usually isn't great. It's hard to find somewhere to charge your phone. You typically have to walk like 6 miles. Everything costs $1 million. People are just generally stressed. And I can't think of any other industry where companies charge that much money only to deliver that uncomfortable of an experience. And my point in saying all this is that when I saw this airline in the show, I was like, maybe it doesn't have to be that way. So the airline is called Jet Suite X, or JSX for short, and they describe themselves as a public charter air carrier. And besides the jets, their selling points include a private terminal, free checked bags, free snacks and drinks, only 30 other passengers, and the ability to arrive at the airport just 20 minutes before departure. I want to walk you through my experience flying JSX, and then I'll give you my thoughts as to whether it's worth it. I'm also in no way affiliated with this company, so this is going to be an honest review. We'll talk about both the pros and the cons, including the environmental impact. One thing you can tell right off the bat is that their routes aren't quite as widespread as most major airlines. In terms of prices, you can look for yourself, but I describe it as a pretty wide range. The absolute cheapest flight I could find on here was $187, and that's a one-way trip from Houston to Dallas on a weekday, whereas the more expensive one-ways can be upwards of $1,000. This is not a situation where 100% of flights on these jets are going to be cheaper than a seat in economy, but every once in a while you can find a fairly reasonable flight. Also, no matter when I buy plane tickets, it's somehow always immediately after the optimal price window. And Google always likes to rub that in, like last week these tickets were $89, but this week they're going to be $289. So if my choice is between a $289 economy flight and a $289 flight on a semi-private jet, the jet feels pretty appealing. I ended up booking a flight from Scottsdale, Arizona, where I was checking out the bathroom at the Odyssey Aquarium, to Las Vegas, where I was going to try the Bacchanal buffet at Caesar's Palace. In this particular instance, it really was less expensive than several economy flights I've taken in the past, but that could vary depending on routes or airlines or even the day that you're checking prices. For my route specifically, at the time I booked a ticket, the weekday flights were $235, but at the time this video is being published, just a couple months later, the weekday price is already up $20, so $255. I don't know if that's a time of year thing or if prices are on like an endless upward trajectory, but I just want to be as transparent as possible. To prepare for my flight, I changed into a collared shirt after leaving the aquarium because I figured I was about to be in a confined space with a lot of fancy people, so I thought it would be a good idea to look nice and hopefully smell nice as well. And that's why I'm thankful to partner with Mando, who's the sponsor of this episode. Mando isn't your typical deodorant. It's a high-performance shield developed by an actual medical doctor, and it's clinically proven to control odor for up to 72 hours. Not only do they have solid deodorant sticks that are formulated to stop odor before it starts, and spray deodorants for hard-to-reach places, but they also have shower products like acidified body wash and cleansing bars. And all of their products are free from harsh ingredients like parabens and baking soda. For most of my life, I've just used like the most basic 6-in-1 body wash or store brand deodorant. I've been missing out on products that are actually going to control odor for an extended period of time. But with Mando, I've been pleasantly surprised by both the effectiveness of the odor blocking and the quality of the scent. Like, it smells good, but it's not overbearing. You know what I mean? If you want to try Mando, their starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like for example, mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer for viewers of the Studio Review, new Mando customers get 20% off site-wide with my exclusive code, which is Sam Reid, spelled S-A-M-R-E-I-D. And you want to plug that in at shopmando.com for 20% off site-wide plus free shipping. That's shopmando.com, and that link's also in the description. You can support the show by telling them I sent you. Mando's got you covered. Protect your pits and smell great doing it. Okay, so after I changed my shirt, I reached my first hurdle with with JSX. And this might be both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, but they operate out of dedicated hangars, not the normal terminals in major airports. So sometimes they're still at a major airport, but just in a different building off to the side somewhere. And other times they operate out of an entirely different airport. In my case, the airport I flew into when I was arriving in Arizona was the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, but JSX doesn't operate out of the Phoenix airport. They actually operate out of the much smaller Scottsdale Airport, which is like 20 miles away, serendipitously pretty close to the aquarium. That setup can be a strength because it means you avoid the parking and the crowds and the long security lines and the general ruckus of busy airports, but it can also be a weakness because it can sometimes mean that there's no rental car return on site, and that was the case at the Scottsdale Airport. They didn't have a rental car center, at least not like for major car rental places like Budget, Hertz, Enterprise, etc. So what I did was find the closest rental car place, which was about 3 miles away, and then I Ubered the rest of the way to the airport. Relatively speaking, I got there fairly early, but you actually don't have to. Their official recommendation is to arrive 20 minutes before your departure, which is crazy. I think most airports recommend 90 minutes ahead of a domestic flight. If I'm being honest, I like to live life on the edge a little bit and have a bad habit of showing up at airports like 45 minutes before my flight.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it.
And that's actually about how early I showed up for this flight as well. At the Scottsdale Airport, you just walk into this building, down this nondescript hallway, past some offices, and you find yourself in the JSX lounge. I checked in with the guy at the counter and he took my rolling bag to go under the plane, and then he printed out a little receipt, and that was my boarding pass. I hadn't even checked in ahead of time online or anything. I think you can, but I wasn't emailed anything about checking in, so I didn't, and it was totally fine. And I can't emphasize enough how casual this felt compared to the normal airport and TSA experience. Like, don't get me wrong, they take security seriously. Like, my bag were swabbed for residue from explosives and there were metal detectors for weapons. But there's no waiting in long lines, no shouting at you to take your shoes off, put your shoes back on, remove your laptops, keep your laptops in your bags. So once I'd checked in, they told me that they'd start the boarding process about 15 minutes before the scheduled departure time. So I had about half an hour to hang out in the lounge. And this is what the lounge looks like. Relatively small, but pretty nice. Not a giant open hangar like I had seen in that episode of Crime Spree, but you can see a bunch of the jets out on the tarmac. There were plenty of comfortable leather chairs, some high top tables, and this little nook style seat, which is where I ended up sitting down. They had these little charging towers, so I took the opportunity to charge like all of my camera gear. And there was also a bathroom for the lounge just outside in the hallway. And those were pretty clean, certainly a lot less crowded than a typical airport bathroom. They had a little bar with tea and cold water and then a coffee machine, so I got myself a vanilla latte. As it got closer to our departure time, more people started to trickle in, and I was super curious to see who else would be on my flight. There were a few other collared shirts, so that felt like a good move. I guess a fair amount of t-shirts too, but I'd rather be overdressed than underdressed. I also saw one fedora, one couple in country club attire, like the woman might have been planning on playing tennis the moment we landed in Vegas. I'm not entirely sure. In terms of the age breakdown, there was one couple that was probably in their early 20s, a guy and his adult son, and then other than that, I'd guess mostly ranging from late 30s to late 40s. Not a crowd I'm like typically brushing shoulders with, but it was super fascinating to me to wonder about their stories. Like, I'm here because I'm filming this pretty unserious YouTube video, but what are you guys doing here? One thing I didn't realize is that JSX is a lot more dog friendly than a typical airline. So there was at least one dog hanging out in the lounge. Not a service animal, just like a pet. They started boarding around the time they told me they would, and that's actually when you go through the metal detector, like right before you get on the plane. And one guy even arrived to the airport building after the boarding process had started, maybe 10 to 15 minutes until wheels up. And he still had plenty of time to spare, not cutting it close at all. So we walked out onto the tarmac to board the plane. Again, very casual. I was expecting the plane to be super sleek and elegant looking on the outside, and it was actually completely covered in a wrap advertising the new How to Train Your Dragon movie, which was hilarious to me. Nothing says luxury like Toothless and the Jay Baruchel character. I got on the plane and made my way to my seat, which was 12A. In full disclosure, you do have to pay extra to pick your seat on JSX. And to be fair, paying for seat selection is one of my gripes with traditional airlines. But I didn't feel like I needed to pay for that in this instance, because here's the good news. Every seat is both a window seat and an aisle seat. You're not sharing armrests with anybody. There's nobody stepping over you to get to the aisle. You're not running the risk of getting placed in a middle seat against your will. Feels like best case scenario. Tiny asterisk here, it's possible that there are some models of their jets that do have the 1 and 2 seat setup, in which case you would be, at least sharing an armrest with someone else, but I can only speak to the one that I was on. Okay, so check out this legroom. When I positioned myself all the way back against the backrest, I would say there was still a solid 8 to 10 inches between my knees and the back of the seat in front of me. There also wasn't like a first class section. I'm 99% sure that my seat was just as nice as the one in the front row. Typically when you board a plane, you have to walk past first class or business class and they just stare at you like you're a kid from the districts arriving at the Capitol from the Hunger Games. But not the case on this plane. The seat did recline, but I didn't really want to miss out on this experience by sleeping through it, so I decided not to take advantage of that particular feature. There was a legit wall outlet for every seat, not like the one that you have to blindly fumble around with or ask your seat neighbor if it's okay to use because there are only 2 for every 3 seats. And if my memory serves me correctly, a lot of the time those plugs only work after takeoff, but the one on this jet worked immediately, so I kept charging camera batteries. And then the standard stuff up above the seat, the AC vent, reading light, and call button. I would say overall it definitely had like private jet vibes. Maybe just missing a couch or something, or a table. I don't know. I've never been on a private jet. I saw a couple other people taking pictures and videos, which made me feel a little bit better because I think that means that I was not the only first timer on this flight. We took off and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that in-flight Wi-Fi was fully included. Like not just the JV Wi-Fi they give you on most flights where you can only really send texts, but this was full-fledged Wi-Fi through Starlink and it wasn't a separate charge. Those little tables across the aisle did seem like they could be useful, but I didn't feel like I was missing out on too much by not paying to sit over on that side. I'll tell you what though, they do not want you sitting on those things. In terms of in-flight service, I think there was just the one flight attendant, and it was a shorter flight, but there were also way fewer people to get to, so she was still able to serve everyone. And look at how extensive these options are. Both alcoholic and non-alcoholic options were available free of charge, and then what I would consider to be much higher quality snacks than the typical pretzels or cookies you get on most major airlines. I went with a Coke, which she placed in the cup holder on the table across the aisle. So it turns out I was in fact entitled to one of those. I assumed that maybe the person on that side of the aisle just got both cup holders. And for my snack, I got this venison jerky stick thing. One of the other passengers across the aisle was just straight up getting stuff done. He had a notebook out and was like starting a business or solving world hunger or something. Headphones on, writing nonstop, just absolutely locked in. And another guy was reading a newspaper, just super classy. Honestly, wish I had thought of that. Because of the distance between the seats, the seatback tray table was far enough away where I could actually use a laptop. I didn't know if this fake wood grain thing was part of the How to Train Your Dragon theming, like this pamphlet, or if that's how the trays look all the time. When I've tried to work on a laptop in basic economy, I have to put my arms into T-Rex mode to type without hitting the people beside me with my elbows, and the top of the laptop can't open fully because there's just not enough room. So between the space and the free Wi-Fi, this seemed like too good of an opportunity not to knock out some work. We hit a few more bumps as we got closer to Vegas. Quick Hoover Dam sighting, and before I knew it, we had landed. Again, pretty short flight, so I didn't need to use the bathroom, but it did look like there was one available at the back of the plane. This time we did actually land at the main Vegas airport, which is Harry Reid, but like I mentioned, JSX doesn't pull up to the main terminal, so the plane parked near this separate hangar. We did end up sitting on the tarmac for a few minutes while they unloaded our luggage, but compared to the process of getting off a typical flight, this felt like no time at all. It honestly feels like people lose all semblance of order and common sense as soon as that seatbelt sign goes off. And it's like, guys, we're in row 34. They haven't even opened the door yet. Why are you standing up? They made a quick announcement about what address to plug in if we were using a rideshare service, which I was, and then they handed out free mints as we got off the plane. We walked a short distance across the tarmac, through a hangar, and into the Vegas JSX lounge, where I checked out the snacks and bevies and ultimately landed on some gummy bears and cookies. And then I made my way outside where JSX employees were helping get people into their ride shares. And this, I can safely say, is the service that you don't get at a typical airport terminal. One of the JSX guys loaded my bags into the Uber, while another one went up and asked the driver if he could move the passenger seat forward so that I'd have more legroom in the back. Incredible. So, is this worth it? Should you fly a public charter like JSX? I'll answer that in just a second, but for those that are interested, I do briefly want to address carbon footprint here. For this specific flight, Scottsdale to Vegas, the JSX jet is going to have slightly lower emissions than a regional jet, and both of those will have lower emissions than a 737. However, when you factor in how many passengers fit on each plane, the JSX flight actually burns more fuel per passenger than the 737. So definitely worse for the environment, but not quite as bad as I expected, and still better than like a personal private jet. Either way, I did go ahead and offset the carbon footprint of this flight, and the details of that are in the description if you're interested. Okay, so here are my thoughts on these JSX flights. I think if you're flying one of these routes that JSX services, it should at least be another item on your menu of options that you check when you're planning your travel. You might luck out and can find a weekday flight that's legitimately the same price, or at least close to the same price as an economy flight. But if not, it just becomes a little bit of a personal calculation about whether the extra comfort and amenities are worth the extra money. But just as a reminder, the different hangars might mean difficulty returning rental cars or extra steps when transferring to another leg of your journey. Is it going to be feasible for me personally to do this on a regular basis? Definitely not. It's not like this is how I'm always going to fly from here on out. I'll probably only ever do it if the price truly is comparable. And then finally, a while back, I made a video about how you can pay to enter some airport lounges even if you don't have airline status or a fancy credit card. And some people in the comments were like, you're going to ruin it for everyone. This is why we gatekeep things. So I just want to say, hypothetically, what would happen if there was a sudden surge in demand because of this video? Well, to oversimplify things, in the short term, prices could rise, especially if JSX uses dynamic pricing. In the long term, though, they could add more routes or more frequent flights on their existing routes. And in that case, the prices would likely stabilize. And if another competitor entered the picture because of the increased demand, that competitor might offer lower prices than JSX to undercut them, which I think would be a good thing. Although I will say that this type of airline hasn't had a great track record of being around for a long time. Like, they usually have a fairly short lifespan. So who knows what will happen, but I'm going to keep sharing fun travel experiences like this. So if you want to see more of that kind of thing, you can hit subscribe down below. And I'll see you in a couple weeks for the next episode of the Studio Review. But in the meantime, if you're struggling mentally or emotionally, I'd love for you to remember that even when it doesn't feel like it, it's going to be okay. I'll see you soon.
I could use a dream or a genie or a wish to go back to a place much simpler than this. Cause after all the partying and smashing and crashing, and all the glitz and the glam and the fashion, and all the pandemonium and all the madness, there comes a